Hey guys, so for this week's video I'm going to show you some clips that I taped last week at the Brooklyn Book Festival. I taped, I think, a good amount of clips and I wanted to share them with you, so I figured this week I would just do that as a video. Yeah, next week I'll be back with a new video that will, be back to the same format that I have, but I thought this might be interesting for some. Yeah, and that's it. And as usual, information will be in the down bar for where you can find me, the previous video before this, and things like that. Yeah, so that's it. Hopefully you enjoy it, and I'll see you guys next week with a new video. Bye!
Don't you all have high expectations? I asked.
Sight, I tell her. All the glorious colors God has painted on lands and faces. Green is the color I remember with the most pleasure. Green from the grass outside our house in New Hampshire. Blue still spills from that square of sky, visible over the bed where I lay ill for almost a year. And Mama says my eyes were bright blue before they shrunk behind my lids. Red I have a strong and disagreeable sense of from when they bled me with leeches. And black I know the longest and best because it is my constant companion. These are the only colors I can recall or imagine with any clarity. Choose, I tap Helen's hand, still thinking. What a serious one. Tell me, she writes. Tell me about you. My story? Everything? Heaven knows there are parts not suitable for a child.
Mindful meditation, love and seeing, a hybrid of fantasy and field guide, novel and essay, treatise and fable.
Thank you, Lev. Invisible Beasts is about a naturalist named Sophie who sees invisible animals. In each chapter, Sophie describes an animal that you or I can't see, but she can, and for which she offers some surprising but real biology, along with reflections on what that animal means to human life. In other words, Invisible Beasts is a book of imaginary animals based on real science and on an idea. Sophie expresses the idea this way, that human beings are the most invisible beasts because we...
To understand that the whole book is in the form of a bestiary?
This is a bestiary. I have revived the bestiary for the 21st century and for the climate change march. Long may it march. I should be brief. Those of you who know about medieval bestiaries know that those are the books written in between basically the 1st century AD and the Middle Ages that gave us the unicorn, the manticore, and other fantastical beasts. They're great fun to read. But they're really bad about biology because biology wasn't invented yet. So they tell us about the unicorn, but they don't tell us much about the creatures who share Earth with us. I wanted to write a bestiary. It did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These are all your debut novels, but were they the first novels you were working on, or is there a lot of other stuff in the works that has yet to see publication?
The question is whether these are all debut novelists, but were their debut novels their first novels? Which is a good question.
My novel is The Procrastination from a nonfiction book that remains unfinished. And I thought that it was a waste of my time, but it was a little easier to work on somehow.
It's my sixth, but I count stuff that I wrote when I was a teenager, which probably is not fair. But I still, I wrote the 100,000 words or whatever, so I'm going to count them. This is my sixth.
I had one try at a novel before, got about 100 pages, about an urban woman who discovers tiny people in her wall, like the borrower, accidentally kills the wife in the blender, and then has a passionate sexual affair with the 2-inch tall man. You can see this would have some problems, but I might go back to it. As a short story.
This is the only book I've been working for a long time.
Before this book, I wrote a book that was heartbreakingly difficult and that I cried all the time reading, in which I discovered the people who invented Israel's first rocket, which included my father. I had to interview scientists. I had to talk to physicists. I love talking to scientists, and really this book came out of the feeling that I wanted to write a joyful book in which I could write about the way scientists see the world, but also, the way that enters the imagination. So I really see this as a kind of partner to the book that I wrote earlier. But it made me laugh instead of cry.
I feel like I should note that my first book, which I wrote when I was 16, was about, in part, a person having a passionate sexual affair with a 6-inch tall man, which I figured was just tall enough.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Yes. No kidding.
Yes, go ahead.
With respect to Miss Bridgman, was there any concern that you might get it wrong?
Is there any concern that you might get it wrong?
Get what wrong?
As to who she was and as to how she conducted her life.
I'm sorry, I'm not.
As to how she conducted her life, who she was.
Well, yeah, I did 2 years of research. I had research fellowships at all different places, including Perkins Institute. And I read all her journals, all her letters, all her teachers' journals.
People that are actually writing the food policy on Capitol Hill, and they don't even know the most basic term that would describe a sustainable food system. And I thought about it. I thought about what happens when we actually don't know the meaning of words, how we are locked out of larger ideas and larger conversations, and how we therefore can't act. And I thought about climate change. Many people now have climate fatigue. It's ironic that there's this big march today. When people first heard the term carbon debt, they didn't know what it was, and they didn't know what it was the 10th time, and in many cases, they just said, you know what, I'm going to just check out of this conversation, it's too complicated. They're using words I don't know. So I thought, what if we would actually undertake an effort to actually explain what these most vital terms and principles mean? So for 5 years, I went around the United States, just starting with food and farming in America, and I asked the foremost practitioners of sustainability to explain that one term, that one core principle that guided and governed what they did. I then made them into very large information artworks, which were about 10 feet by about 8 feet tall, and I asked them to work with me to actually write the text that would go on each one. And it's very hard, obviously. Usually I have things behind me that I can show them, but imagine hundreds of these very, very large images that explain all of these core principles, each one in these people's own words. My previous book had been about the origins of slow food, a book that I made in Italy, and that traveled as a museum show, and it was a very rarefied air conversation. And I thought, with these images, I would do something different. So instead of traveling one show, I actually printed 100 shows. And I asked anybody around the nation who wanted to be a curator to just go to our website, apply, pick 5 places that they would show it.
We had this whole new toolbox for reshaping animal life. And obviously biotechnology is a hot topic. I'm not the first journalist to write about it. I'm not the first person to think or speak about it. But the more I read about it, the more it occurred to me that though we have a lot of discussions about what biotechnology means for us as humans, we don't talk a lot about what it means for animals, and the animals who, in many cases, are the first creatures that are sort of subject to some of these technologies. So that's what I set out to explore in my book. Broadly, it's a look at how biotechnology is reshaping the future of animals. And I define biotechnology pretty broadly. So often when we say biotech, we think about things like genetic engineering and cloning, and I definitely talk about those in the book. But I also look at things like prosthetics, state-of-the-art bionic limbs that are being given to animals, and I look at advances in the field of cybernetics, so remote-controlled animals that are being developed. And one of the questions I look at, and that sort of runs through the book, is why are we doing these things? What do we hope to gain? What's the purpose of these changes we're making? And obviously it's not surprising that a lot of the applications are for us. They're about human gain and things we might want out of animal bodies. So for instance, one of the growth areas is a field known as farming, and that's spelled with a PH. It's a combination of the word pharmaceutical and farming. And the idea behind farming with a pH is that you might be able to engineer animal bodies that produce human medicine. And so scientists have in fact done this a number of times. There's a herd of goats out at the University of California, Davis. And they've been engineered to make a pharmaceutical compound in their milk. And the idea is then you can take this milk and you can extract the protein and turn it into medicine that's prescribed to humans. So that's a human-centered application. There are other human-centered applications. With cloning, for instance, you might have read some stories about, a few rich pet owners in the U.S. and elsewhere had their pets cloned.
Manual, and George asked me to come because it's a collaboratively made book. Basically, my background, I'm a conceptual artist, performer. I teach at Pratt Institute. I've been involved in different types of public artworks that are socially engaged or political since the early 90s. And I was also a part of Occupy Wall Street. And what happened was, as we were occupying, and then after we were evicted, different working groups started meeting indoors and talking about different parts of society that we wanted to address. Around January, the student debt working group got together, and we started talking about student debt. Because Occupy was really, the heart of it, the heart and soul of it was young people who graduated from school, they couldn't get jobs, they had huge amounts of debt. So I started noticing my students, art students, around 2000 come out of school with $40,000, $50,000 in debt. I just knew that was wrong. It was absolutely wrong. And so we started meeting and organizing around what we call T1 Day. That was the day that credit card debt exceeded $1 trillion. Now that was more than credit card debt. So student debt now is more than credit card debt. We have people that are having their social security garnished because they didn't pay off their student debts. Okay, it's a huge problem. So after T1 Day, I went off to the Berlin Biennial. When I came back, George and people from Occupy Theory, student debt, the Free University, we're talking, and we started meeting in Washington Square Park and talking about all kinds of debt, because it isn't just student debt. We have to talk about it. What the Debt Resisters Operation Manual does, it talks about systemic problems. If you want to call it neoliberalism, if you want to call it capitalism, it doesn't matter. We're in a situation, and I admire and support all kinds of resistance on every level. But if you don't look at the system, we are never going to be able to solve any of the problems that we have.